Good morning and welcome to the last of a series of seven Proposition C town halls. Uh, I'm Richard Cook. Uh, Next slide, please. Over the course of this town hall, we'll be discussing what is Proposition C, how does it affect parks and recreation, how does it affect stormwater control, how will it affect the city budget, and a sales tax comparison now versus what would happen if it passed and with regard to our neighbors. That'll be followed up by a Q&A. On the Q&A, if you have any questions, there are two ways to ask a question. One thing you can do is click on the Q&A on your Zoom screen and type in what your question is. If you choose the other option to raise your hand, again at the bottom of your Zoom screen, at that point, then we would actually call on you and would ask you to verbally ask your question so that we may respond verbally. Next slide, please, Dave. What is Proposition C? Okay. Proposition C is a sales tax that by state statute, municipalities are allowed to apply. It's a sales tax from which the proceeds have to be dedicated to funding either parks or stormwater control issues. And it would have to be within Creve Coeur. All money raised by this 0.5% sales tax increase would be Creve Coeur's and does not have to be shared with the county or other surrounding municipalities. Half a cent sales tax basically corresponds to about 10 cents on a $20 purchase, 25 cents on a $50 purchase, etc. The citizens of Creve Coeur will be what we'll have on the ballot Proposition C in the next Tuesday's election. And you'll have the option to vote for or against this. And this is just this town hall is to try to educate you on how we see the costs and the benefits. Next slide, please. At this point, Dave McCoy, who's chairman of the Parks and Historical Preservation Committee, will take over the presentation and discuss how it applies to the parks side of things. Dave?
Okay, thank you, Rich. Yes, I'm Dave McCoy. I have been a Creve Coeur resident for about 25 years, and I've been involved with the Parks and Historical Preservation Committee for about 6 or 7 years. And I'm very passionate about the parks, and I'm going to talk about the benefits of the parks and the park master plan that we put together last year. This slide here just lists some of the benefits that most people might be familiar with when we talk about parks. People get out in the park and they enjoy that active lifestyle where they're taking a walk, taking a jog, taking the dog a walk, or having their kids play on the playground. Those are some of the main benefits that people attribute to the parks. In our parks also, we increase community engagement by each year we have several concerts in the park where we bring the community together and people get to know each other better. We also have other events, cultural events too, where we bring in different groups to entertain the community, but at the same time bringing people together, sitting next to each other, talking to each other, that really improves the cohesion of the community. And in many ways that provides us with a safer community and one where crime can be reduced because people are just more integrated. The parks also, as most people are aware of, have trees and grass and soil, which helps bring it, cleans the air. It also helps reduce the amount of water that runs off into the creeks. And so when we talk about parks and we talk about stormwater, there's a synergy there where the parks can help reduce the amount of water in the creeks and streams, which then can reduce the amount of money or effort that needs to be put in protecting the streams. And so there's that synergy between the two. Actually in Millennium Park, if you people are familiar with Millennium Park, there's a large basin there that catches water that runs down from the BJC hospital. And most of the time that basin is empty, and it's really a place where there's a lot of trees and plants growing, and it becomes very beautiful at different times of the year. But when it rains really heavily, that basin also provides a way to catch the water that comes down from Olive and BJC and acts as kind of a buffer. And so there's, again, a synergy between parks and stormwater. The parks also help strengthen local economies. And in the sense that when people are looking for jobs, they come to Creve Coeur and they look around and see what kind of parks we have. And that can be a deciding factor on whether or not they would want to take a job here. At the same time, companies looking to set up their business looks at the not only the economy in Creve Coeur, but the whole infrastructure, and parks are an important part of that. So parks have many different benefits, and these are just some of the most familiar ones. So last year we spent several months, probably close to 6 months, putting together what we call a park master plan. And this is a way to look out over the next 10 years at things that could be implemented in the parks to improve our parks. We did this in cooperation between the city staff. We hired a consultant, and we worked together with the different committees that are part of the city, as well as the community. We had multiple town halls and we did multiple surveys, and we went out and looked at each of the different parks and did an assessment of what equipment is currently in those parks, and brought all that information together, all those opinions, all those ideas. And out of that, we developed this 10-year plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit in detail on the next couple of slides about some of the things that we've identified for each of the parks. But the park master plan, one of the main benefits from that is that it gave us an idea of what we could actually do in our parks. It kind of created a vision, and it also gave us a way to estimate how much it may cost to be able to implement those different amenities or improvements in the park. The parks also, just kind of finish up on this slide, but while we're thinking about improving the parks also require quite a bit of maintenance. And at different times, we have to shut down different playgrounds, equipment, because they may have rusted or the pad underneath them are not safe. And so just on an annual basis, keeping the parks maintained is really important. And that's part of the overall park master plan too. So here in the next 2 or 3 slides, we'll just kind of look a little closer at some of the ideas that we had for each of the parks. And one of the things that I'll mention right up front, because we've had this question several times, is that what we're looking at here, I've called it kind of a framework. It's really just the start of the changes that we would make to the park as we developed that plan last year. And as things change going forward, as the economy changes, as the demographics in the city changes, and as technology can be changing, so that can affect our plan. So this is the kind of plan that we will review on an annual basis to make sure that we're focused on the right things and have the right priorities. And we did put together a process to prioritize all of these different projects across all of the different parks. But here you can see, just as an idea, some of the things that came up for each of the parks. One of the major areas that we need to improve, and this came up number 1 in the surveys, is just improving the trails, making the parks more walkable. keeping the surfaces on the trails, safe so that people are not tripping over things and cracks and so on and so forth. And so that's something that shows up for each of the parks. Improving the signage in the park so that people understand what different amenities are. We have lots of new visitors to our parks, and sometimes people come to the park, they may visit a particular event, but they don't understand, or they don't realize that, hey, there's a walking trail that, if they had come sooner, they could have walked around it or could have waited behind and done that. But at the same time, there's lots of new things that we look at improving in the parks. And this just lists some of them here. Outdoor fitness equipment, which is very popular with all different age groups. Improving or providing a bandstand or an amphitheater at Millennium Park where we have our concerts, so we don't have to rent a trailer from St. Louis County. Kids love ninja courses, something that we don't have in our parks. Conway Park over here in the right, again, the walking paths need to be improved. Improving the parking there at different times. That park can get pretty full. There's a small parking lot. How do we change the overall structure of the park to improve parking? And at the same time, maybe changing some of the amenities in the park to provide the things that people like the most. Disc golf is a good example. The Dr. Philip Venable Memorial Park, this used to be called Bernie Park. We've come up with a lot of ideas. For example, the splash pad at Millennium Park is very popular, but we don't have one on the east side of 270. So we looked at, could we put one in there? Improving the tennis courts, pickleball came up quite a few times in our surveys, and trying to look at ways to get more uses out of the tennis courts, for example, making them multi-purpose. Malcolm Terrace Park, that's a beautiful park that has trails and goes through a small forest or woods. We need to improve the signage there. We need to improve the trails. And what other amenities could we add there? Developing a nature trail, adding some new play equipment. Things like that can be done. And these are all in alignment with the wishes of the people that did the surveys that participated in the park master plan, as well as the consultants giving us ideas that they came up with because they've worked with other cities. Lake Skill Park and Laverne Collins Park. At Lake Skill, we have lighted tennis courts. Again, how can we get those more use of those, providing more value for the investment that we put into those, making them year round. One thing that came up is that in most of the parks, with the exception of Millennium Park, we don't have year-round bathrooms. So how do we change those bathrooms so that they can be heated during the winter? And so people, when they go to the park, during the winter, they can use the bathrooms there. So these are the kind of things that we have in the plan, but the plan is the plan until it changes. And as things change, we'll make adjustments to the plan. And as the plan gets rolled out, we'll have more of those discussions with the community. So currently, in terms of how do we pay for all of this, as you may have seen there, the estimated cost is about $8 million over the next 10 years. Currently, the parks depend on money that mostly comes through grants from the county. These are generally biannual grants, and they're kind of like big ticket items. We may focus them on trails, or we may focus them on one playground in one park. And taking that approach is not going to get us to what we have in our current plan. So with that, we would end up taking roughly about 30 years to achieve what we've come up with in the plan. So we wanted to look for a different approach, and that's why we're proposing, Prop C in the upcoming election. So I'm going to take a quick break, and I'm going to let Rich talk about stormwater control. Is Rich is on mute. Go switch yourself off mute, Rich.
Thank you, Dave. I'm Richard Cook. I'm the chairman of the I'm no longer the chairman of the Creve Coeur Stormwater Committee. I just got termed out as chairman, but I'm a member of the Creve Coeur Stormwater Committee. I've been on that committee for about 5 years. I'm a 20-year resident of Creve Coeur. My background, I'm a civil engineer, and I've previously in my working career, now that I'm retired now, I've been involved in literally probably over 100 municipal stormwater projects over the course of my career. As the previous owner of a pump company, I've been involved in a number of projects, including a number of government entities, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Louis MSD, the state of Missouri, many levy districts and municipalities. Let's just start out with what is stormwater? Stormwater is really just handling surface water, and it's been an age-old issue in Creve Coeur. If you look at the layout, the topography of Creve Coeur, it's a series of rolling hills. And between every two hills, water accumulates and it flows somewhere. Intermittently, a lot of times called intermittent streams, it will flow only when it's raining. In addition, we have a number of creeks that are spring fed and slowly fed from these intermittent streams that basically get the water out of our city. There's many issues with stormwater in Creve Coeur. Part of our issue is that in particular, the older areas of Creve Coeur, the stormwater was designed to smaller standards. In other words, smaller storms of less intensity than are common today. We have seen an increase in the intensity and the frequency of storms, and current design standards have bigger infrastructure to handle that. In addition to the infrastructure not being large enough in a number of areas, we've also a situation where we're having a lot of erosion events. I mean, if you look at the development of Creve Coeur over the last, even just the last 20 years that I've been in Creve Coeur, there's much more impermeable surface that creates a lot of runoff. 3 houses where there used to be 1 house, things of that nature. Now, anybody building a new structure has to handle that stormwater, but grandfathered in, we have numerous a great amount of development in Creve Coeur that's created a lot more stormwater issue than the systems were initially designed to handle. Next slide, please, Dave. In 2012, Creve Coeur did a stormwater master plan. And that master plan identified $13 million in stormwater improvement needs, and that was 8 years ago. 8 years ago dollars in terms of inflation rate, 8 years ago problems. We frankly haven't had the budget to even be able to go in and reassess what those problems are, what those issues are, and how much it would cost to fix them. Oftentimes, parks and stormwater projects overlap in that a lot of parks are located in the lower lying areas between a couple of hills or maybe in permanent creeks. Next slide, please, Dave. Since 2012, you recall, I just said back in 2012, we recognized perhaps $13 million in needs. We've been spending about $120,000 since 2012. At that rate, it will take about 100 years just to fix those projects that we've already identified as having a need. At this point, we're really only responding to crises projects where there's already been some kind of a catastrophic failure. It costs much more to resolve issues after there's a failure than if you can be proactive and address needs that you're perceiving are going to create a catastrophic failure. Typical projects tend to involve replacing culverts that go under streets. There's a lot of erosion control projects as well. And again, additional funding would allow us to address these proactively instead of waiting for catastrophic failure. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an erosion issue. This is Ladue Road. You can see in the picture on the left, a stream running along the side of Ladue Road there, basically washed out the sidewalk and part of the road base. That first picture that should be on your left, that was taken in about the April timeframe. By the time we got to August, the situation had depreciated even more. And you can see the collapse got to be even worse. Again, the further these kinds of things collapse, the more they cost to fix. Next slide, please. An active project right now, and basically, used up all the budget for this year and most of the budget from last year to get this one project done, was replacing a failed culvert on Middlebrook Lane on the east side of 270 in Creve Coeur. This failure again resulted from insufficient size of infrastructure. The culvert wasn't as big. You can see from the left, it was beginning to fail the entire road. It's a safety hazard for cars driving by. God forbid we would have needed to get a fire truck across that bridge to service a community. It didn't become an issue, but without handling it, it could have. And then you can see on the picture right, there's from the capital improvement budget, the Middlebrook project is almost completed. And here you can see a construction, a photo of it during the construction process. Next slide, please. And again, a number of the issues that we have are actually in city parks. Here you can see significant erosion, under a bridge in the Malcolm Terrace Park. You can see very significant corrosion and erosion in an old corrugated metal pipe in Conway Park. Again, fixing these before they fail or collapse is much less expensive and much easier to do than if you can do it in a proactive basis than waiting for catastrophic failure. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Dave McCoy, who's going to cover some of the budget aspects of Proposition C.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Yes, and I kind of mentioned before that the parks budget is primarily funded through the capital improvement plan, the capital budget. And roughly right now, that's about, we get about 5% of that capital budget. Most of that money goes to pay for the improvements to our roads and other things in the city, is, new vehicles for the police or new parks vehicles or snow plows and things like that. So that what's left over basically is what goes to fund the parks. And right now that average is about $185,000 a year. And that's a combined for parks and stormwater. And the capital fund actually varies from year to year also. So as there's less money in the capital fund, then that also means less money for parks and for stormwater. And that's what makes it really hard for us to plan ahead and be able to address the needs of the community. In one of our previous meetings, we had a question about the playground in Lake School Park. And unfortunately, due to the weather, that playground just became unsafe. Some of the metal was rusted, and we just couldn't allow that playground to stand, so we had to take it down. And for us to replace that, that requires quite a bit of capital, not just for the equipment itself, but the infrastructure, the foundation, and so on. And so to replace that without any other additional funding would take several years, and it just becomes a priority with all the other projects that the city has to manage. So we looked at or proposed the idea of having a small increase in our sales tax. This is an approach that other cities, most other neighboring cities, or actually all neighboring cities, but most cities in the St. Louis County area are using what we call a parks and stormwater sales tax. And as Rich mentioned at the beginning, that 0.5% sales tax is comes out of any transactions that people have within the city, and that money is only available and used for parks and stormwater. And one of the benefits with taking this approach is that the sales tax, while the residents have to pay the sales tax, also non-residents pay it. And what that means is people that come into our city to work or to go out to eat, or just come in and use our parks, if they purchase something in our city, then they end up paying the additional sales tax, which then goes to the parks. And just to kind of give you a feel for how does our sales tax rate compare to other neighboring cities. So here on the right, you can see our sales tax rate is 8.4875%. And we're second bottom compared to the neighboring cities. If we go with this extra 0.5% increase, that moves us up one slot above Chesterfield up to that 8.9875. So we're still further down the list compared to some of our cities that we're pretty familiar with, Town and Country, De Pere, and so on. And so we feel like this is a reasonable approach to gain some additional revenue that can be really targeted on parks and stormwater projects. And so if Proposition C passes next week, then that new 0.5-cent sales tax would take effect on April 1st. And what that means is that this money would start coming into the city on a monthly basis, basically. And so once we know that we're going to have that revenue stream, then we can start looking at the projects that we have both in the park master plan and the stormwater master plan to figure out where are our priorities. And so we've also come up with prioritization process that we can look across the different projects to figure out which ones are the most important. And the one thing I want to make sure is that that process is very transparent, and the decisions will be made, between the committees as well as the city council and the city staff. So we'll all work together to figure out what those priorities are. And with that sales tax, it'll bring in about $2 million in revenue each year. And obviously that's quite a lot of money. But that's the kind of money that we'll need to be able to fund those projects, both for parks and for stormwater. So I guess we'll just kind of wrap it up. As Rich mentioned at the beginning, this is actually our last town hall. So we've had quite a lot of interaction with the general public, and hopefully answered a lot of questions to make it a little easier for them to understand what Proposition C is all about. In case you're still not sure, there is information on the city's website, and this is the address. But if you go to the main city webpage, you'll see some pictures there that you can click on, and it'll take you to the Prop C information. And there's also a list of frequently asked questions. And Mark, who's our city administrator, Mark Perkins, has offered to answer any other questions that you may have. If you want to give him a call at the city hall, he'd be happy to answer any questions. So we have just a few more days before everybody votes, so make sure you go out and vote on Tuesday.